Hi everybody, my name is Diana and I'm here to talk to you about some of the environmental and wildlife impacts of this proposed development. One of the reasons I got involved in protecting our futures is because I've become increasingly concerned about the loss of wildlife habitat and connectivity in the Bow Valley. And since wildlife can't tell us exactly what they think about the land, we've had to learn about a few things that are important to them, based on their behavior, based on published research, and based on what the experts have told us. What we've learned is that while this is not a large area, the Rundleview Green Space serves three important functions to wildlife. First, it provides excellent habitat. And with the pace and extent of development in this valley, every incremental loss of habitat is detrimental to wildlife. The proposed development would initially clear 9 to 12 acres of open space that wildlife currently use and travel through year-round. Remote camera data and anecdotal evidence from Canmore residents show that the land is used regularly, sometimes daily, by multiple species, including black bears, elk, deer, and coyotes, and probably more that we haven't caught on a camera yet, but we know they're out there. We are working with two wildlife experts, one of whom has visited the land a couple of times and confirmed that this is an excellent parcel of wildlife habitat and forms part of a larger corridor complex connecting to other habitat patches and wildlife corridors. Second, the land provides connectivity, serving as a way through a pinch point. And I don't know how well you can see the map that's on the screen here, but I'll try and just point out a few things. So the proposed spa and hotel is this little, the lands are this little red blob up here. And this green area here is the Georgetown Quarry Lake Wildlife Corridor. You can see it, it comes basically right down and pinches against the land there. Then across the highway, we have the Quarry Lake Local Habitat Patch. And then that connects into the Three Sisters along Valley Wildlife Corridor. And then about half a kilometer north of the proposed site, there is a regional habitat patch as well. So wildlife can basically move from Banff National Park through this network of corridors and habitat patches, but in doing so, they hit this pinch point here, and they can move on the side, basically I guess it'd be the south side of the highway, but that gets pinched off by the forebay, and then the land is the official corridor is quite narrow here, but it basically abuts directly against the proposed spa and hotel lands. So what we understand is that wildlife are very likely using this as part of a wildlife corridor, even though it's not officially designated as such. One of the other things we've learned is that research shows that the ability of wildlife to continue to travel through this habitat depends on the extent of human activity and development on adjacent lands. Research also shows that wildlife are increasingly moving at night when humans aren't around. As you can imagine, a hotel, spa, and staff accommodation would have traffic and people coming and going from early in the morning until late evening, all of which would be highly disruptive to wildlife. Complicating things, as I mentioned, wildlife have limited options for travel through this network of corridors and habitat patches, with the forebay being a particular impediment. Practically speaking, as I mentioned, the green space functions as part of the wildlife corridor network. Again, even though it's not officially designated a wildlife corridor, practically speaking, that's where it sits geographically, and that's how it's being used. So the third reason this land is important to wildlife is that it acts as a buffer between the wildlife corridor and the neighborhoods of Rundleview and Hospital Hill. So we know that Rundleview is already considered a neighborhood with significant risk for human-wildlife conflict. And we're quite concerned that the development of this land, with the increase in both physical buildings and human activity, is likely to force more wildlife into Rundleview and Hospital Hill, and to increase human-wildlife encounters in those neighborhoods, which, as we know, almost never turn out well for wildlife. So when this proposal comes forward, Council will also be faced with an important policy issue. Given that the leased lands are located adjacent to both a wildlife corridor and a local habitat patch, the municipal development plan is clear that Council shall, and I'm using the word shall specifically because that's what's in the MDP, have regard for the Bow Corridor Ecological Advisory Group guidelines. And those set out very specific principles for how development is to occur on lands that are adjacent to a wildlife corridor and a habitat patch. We've reviewed these guidelines in detail and identified numerous contraventions that would result if the development were to be approved. And I'll just give you one example of what the guidelines state. So, new land activities that are considered acceptable adjacent to wildlife corridors and habitat patches should include those that are less intrusive, i.e. recreational trails and golf courses. A hotel, spa, parking lot, and staff accommodation are not non-intrusive uses. These facilities will have a far higher impact than recreational trails, with both a very significant physical footprint and operations occurring throughout the day and evening. Finally, we have a number of other questions about the environmental impacts of the proposed development, and I'll just give you a couple examples. So, what would be the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the volume of concrete and or other material that may be required to fill undermined land? We don't obviously have that answer at this point, but it could be significant. And how will air pollution from disturbance of coal-related contaminants on the green space be mitigated? We've already seen with the drilling that's taken place, there's a lot of exposed coal on the surface on the leased lands at the moment. So to summarize, what I hope you take away from this discussion are that, one, for wildlife, these lands provide important habitat, connectivity, and a buffer from the nearby neighborhoods of Rundleview and Hospital Hill. Two, there is a major policy issue related to the development of the lands adjacent to wildlife corridor and habitat patch. And three, we have other significant questions about the environmental impact of a hotel and spa, which will be challenging for the developer to fully mitigate. Thank you.